When I think about a diverse and inclusive workplace, I think about a particular scene in Zootopia. Yes, the animation by Walt Disney Pictures depicting what the world looks like for all mammals. From the largest elephant to the smallest shrew, they all lived together harmoniously. I love the giddy feeling Judy Hopps, the main rabbit character, feels as she enters the Zootopia for the first time. The train passing through multiple ecosystems for animals that live in the desert, the forest, the snow, and in sunny weather hints how she feels about being the first rabbit to being a police cop, a world of new possibilities. But of course, reality is a bit more nuanced. There are a lot of unconscious biases, subtle discriminations, and mixed realities that Judy the Rabbit experiences that caused us to look back on real society. Is asking a workplace for all to be included too much of an ask? Hi, I'm Monica Kang, and you're listening to Curious Monica, where we study how different people thrive at different jobs. Today, I'm eager to explore careers in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. What do they do? Why is it important? And how do they start doing what they do?
But remember that diversity is so much more than that. Think of it like an iceberg is one of my good takeaways for thinking about diversity. If you start listing the ones that people see, that list on the iceberg is going to be really small. But then think about underneath the surface, there's going to be so many more things.
And it's this idea of like, I am entering a space where I can be my whole self. I can feel seen and I can feel heard. I don't have to like hide the fact that, I don't know, my kid threw up on me this morning. I don't have to hide the fact that, English isn't my first language, but I'm doing my very best. I'm just being who I am every day. Now, some people who are listening are like, what, there aren't people that's not happening? Like, that's not the default? And actually, no, that's very much not the case. I run a community of underrepresented people, and there are people in my community that show up at work every day and they're code switching, they're filtering, they're hiding a part of themselves because they want to fit in. They're not enjoying psychological safety.
Jobs related to diversity, inclusion, and belonging have been on the rise and are getting more global attention in all industries. Even during the pandemic, Indeed career data found that between September 2019 and 2020, job postings in diversity, inclusion, and belonging have risen 56.3% from 140 jobs per million to 219. This is probably not a surprise, seeing how the Black Lives Matter movement, the rise in Asian hate crimes, and the pandemic made it more visible how people felt about the workplace. Safe or not safe. But what does it mean to be in those jobs? And what do you actually do in these roles? How do you start a career in such roles? Today, we'll explore a bit more into these questions. Okay, but first, to understand the importance of these roles, we have to understand what each of these words mean in the workplace and how they differ. Diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging are often thrown around together, but they imply different aspects of the workplace, culture, and experience. Diversity is the state of the workplace having different people. Inclusion is when those diverse voices and perspectives feel included to show up as who they are. Equity is when all voices get a fair chance to engage and participate. Belonging is the newest but arguably the most important extensive term that explains how we could feel at work if we really felt unbiased and fully included. Just because someone from a diverse background is included in the organization does not mean they feel belonging. And to understand that nuance, we have to first take a closer look at each word, starting with diversity. Ashley Brundage explains that diversity is so much more than having different looks. A lot of diversity is what is not visible.
So diversity, right, is the presence of differences, right? That is all about who you are. And of course, the first thing that people think about is they look at someone and they immediately think, what is different about them? So skin tone, race, ethnicity, gender, right? Those are the ones that you're typically, statistically speaking, going to pull away right away. But remember that diversity is so much more than that. Think of it like an iceberg is one of my good takeaways for thinking about diversity. If you start listing the ones that people see, that list on the iceberg is going to be really small. But then think about underneath the surface, there's going to be so many more things.
Ashley Brundage speaks this language day in and out as the Vice President of the Diversity Inclusion at PNC and the founder and author of Empowering Differences. You'll recall, we had her in our author series where she spoke about her journey in writing her book. Here, I wanted to learn more about her role in diversity in the workplace. Her devotion to fostering an inclusive workplace for all stems from her personal experience being transgender. I was inspired by her courage and thoughtfulness when I saw her speak at a national business conference a few years ago as the keynote speaker. I asked her if she had always thought of building a career in diversity and inclusion. Ashley shares that she never realized that diversity and inclusion was something she could do until a major life experience changed things.
Until I had things come in my life.
Ashley was still keeping her status as a transgender person private and not telling anyone.
I was privately living a double
Hiding her identity led to exhaustion, which ultimately ended her first career. She wasn't comfortable because she wasn't able to be her authentic self. The change in career led her to think about what's next and how she could learn more. Ashley has been working in the restaurant business for over a decade and felt exhausted living this double life. As she gained more courage being herself, she got curious why certain things at work influenced how she felt at work. The importance of inclusion was key, and that had to come from the top.
So inclusion is all about that intentional action of making someone feel really welcomed. It's the smile sometimes. I mean, that's an actionable item that you can do immediately. Start smiling to everybody. And if you're wearing a mask, guess what? You could say, hey, by the way, I just wanted you to know that I'm smiling. So that is an amazing thing that you can do immediately today. And then I think the end part of your question stems around connecting all of this work to leadership. Because leadership is the foundational principle that ties everything around the world of diversity and inclusion together. If you're not growing and cultivating leaders, if you're not growing and cultivating your leadership skills, then you're not winning in the D&I space.
Inclusion is action! I love this reminder. From sharing a smile, as Ashley said, to being intentional about who we invite to the table. All are decisions and actions we make each day that have direct consequences on how we show up to work. So, why should we foster a workplace that is inclusive? Because when work isn't a place that we feel psychologically safe, we don't bring our full selves to work. We won't be able to fully explore how to bring up new ideas, be productive, or bring the best insights out. Abadesi understands this nuance, having worked in top tech firms and having experienced how the lack of diversity led companies to poor product development and unconscious and conscious workplace discriminations.
And then over the next few years, working at Groupon, working at Amazon, working at Hotel Tonight, I just started to realize that there was something fundamentally wrong about the way the tech industry operated in terms of its representation. I just realized there was this really urgent need for the tech sector to be filled with the people that represent society. We were already hearing stuff about Apple released the health app, but it didn't have a period tracker, or the first autonomous vehicles that hit the road couldn't recognize dark skin. And on a very personal level, I was feeling excluded in a startup that I was working at. And speaking to my friends in tech, I just started to realize this double standard where my experiences of almost being bullied, really, being, made to feel inferior, gaslit, were shared by women, especially women of color, but not by men, especially white men. And that's when I decided to start Hustle Crew. And, 4.5 years later, here we are. And Brandwatch is a company that I worked with through Hustle Crew that decided to create this role in 2020. And they headhunted me into this role. So I'm really happy to be there.
Meet Abadesi Osunsade. the VP of Global Community and Belonging at Brundage, and the founder and CEO of Hustle Crew. She is a powerhouse. I was deeply inspired by what she has already done and what she continues to do to advocate for inclusive diversity in technology. An alumni of LLC, London School of Economics and Political Science, she brings her unique economic perspective to help leaders quantify why this problem is detrimental to our workplace engagement and happiness. At Hustle Crew, she has built a community for diverse tech professionals to discuss, learn, and unlearn how a safe workplace can be built. Having learned firsthand the experience of inclusion and unconscious biases as a professional who happens to be Asian, Black, and a female. Today, her work is recognized across London and is often quoted in news outlets like Bloomberg, Financial Times, and even magazines like Marie Claire and Elle. I asked her if she could share more for folks who are still not sure what workplace inclusion looks like. She shared with enthusiasm one of my favorite phrases: psychological safety.
There's a lot of really interesting research coming out around like productivity, like what makes a team productive and what makes a company productive, like what makes a company a place that beats its competitors, generates a lot of revenue, but also retains its staff because people enjoy the work that they do and they're happy and they feel fulfilled. And a lot of the research from behavioral psychologists and like organizational theory experts says that there's this common thread amongst high-performing teams, and it's called psychological safety. And it's this idea of like, I am entering a space where I can be my whole self. I can feel seen and I can feel heard. I don't have to like hide the fact that, I don't know, my kid threw up on me this morning. I don't have to hide the fact that, English isn't my first language, but I'm doing my very best. I'm just being who I am every day. Now, some people who are listening are like, what, there aren't people that's not happening? Like, that's not the default? And actually, no, that's very much not the case. I run a community of underrepresented people, and there are people in my community that show up at work every day and they're code switching, they're filtering, they're hiding a part of themselves because they want to fit in. They're not enjoying psychological safety. So how do we achieve psychological safety and like promote psychological safety in our teams? How can we make people feel like they can operate in their role as their full selves without having to fit into this mold that we've created, or without having to like spend energy pretending to be more like their boss, pretending to be more like the founder just to fit in? And the way that we do that is just by like being aware of cultural differences and identity differences and being curious about people's differences. It's like we all have the power to watch a different type of show on Netflix, listen to a different type of podcast on Spotify, and we can listen to content that's been created by people who don't share a lived experience. So, there might be someone on my team who's non-binary, and I don't really know why it's so important for them to have this gender pronoun, they, them, when they look like a she, her, right? That could be my ignorance. Now, what can I do, therefore, to be more inclusive? I can literally just go on the internet and then just like start looking up like, non-binary, what does that mean? I can follow someone on Instagram whose preferred pronoun is they, them, and I can hear what they're saying about their journey to understand, their gender identity and their gender expression better. In a similar kind of way, I might find out someone on my team is dealing with autism or Asperger's or some other, situation that actually impacts the way that they process information, the way they communicate, the way that they work. I might decide I want to watch a movie about a really famous person, who's autistic, and actually just start to create some empathy and some compassion for that. So I think for us as individuals, we already have curiosity. Like curiosity is just like an innately human element. We need to like learn to direct that curiosity towards the lived experiences of other people so that we can really start to like do the work of like building that bridge and understanding the way they're moving through the world. In a way that's like compassionate.
Wow, powerful reminders indeed. Abadesi shares that curiosity, my other favorite word, is also incredibly important. When you see differences, how do you respond? Think about the last time you tried a new food or watched a new movie. How did you engage with it? It takes intentionality and practice, but we can all do more of it. Just like how you are tuning into these episodes to learn more about how different people thrive at different jobs, You can also approach your workplace with more curiosity to get to know your colleagues and your surroundings better. I asked Ashley then what kind of work she does as the VP of Diversity and Inclusion. Now that we have some understanding of psychological safety and workplace inclusion, tell us a bit more. What do you actually do in your work to foster that? How would one build this expertise?
Actually, foundationally doing diversity and inclusion work is centered around many different things depending on your organization. But a lot of times it stems from engagement, resource groups or platforms, affinity groups are amazing points where like employees get a chance to connect with others. So really building that connection with others gives more engagement. And then more engaged employees are producing at a commensurable rate than employees who are not engaged. So that's a big part around functional diversity and inclusion work. And then I think the next thing stems around probably culture, right? Because really, depending on what you functionally do for the organization that you represent or work for, it may look different. So if I'm a salesperson versus if I'm in HR, right? All of those things are inherently different. And so you have to think that if you're doing D&I work in that space, that your job then should be centered around engaging the culture. And then I'd probably say the last piece to this is then the brand externally, right? Think about how diversity and inclusion is in the marketing campaign that you're doing. It's in your corporate giving. It's in your governance. It's in your C-suite, your CEO, your own personal family, right? Could be doing D&I work. I mean, all of this can be applied to an individual person, a nonprofit organization, a business entity. There's lots of power behind this. It's how we grow as a person, but it's also how a business can grow.
Engagement in raising more awareness across all channels. It's being intentional about the human experience, how information flows, how the experience of engagement is like, and finding ways to improve upon it. And how you bring inclusion and diversity to your workplace will differ based on where you are. This is why even though organizations create diversity roles, when they are only at manager level and don't have direct relationships to influence the full organization, changes will take a lot longer and not stick. This is why Abadesi appreciated how Brandwatch gave her the opportunity to co-create the role and the title when she joined the organization a few years ago. One question she explicitly asked was to not have the word diversity and inclusion. Why? Because at the end of the day, what this work really means is creating a workplace for all to feel a sense of belonging, and thinking only about diversity and inclusion is a short-term thinking.
Being able to join a company like Brandwatch, when we started this conversation around what the role would be, what the priority would be, how it would operate, who it would work with, what the title would be, I suddenly realized never in my life, in my career, have I been like directing my potential employer in terms of what my role should be and like who I should work with. And, they were even like, let's co-create the job title, right? Because you've been saying that diversity and inclusion could silo this work, and this work is about so much more than just that. So that was also one of those kind of like pinch me moments. And I know, having joined the team, that they're very grateful to have me there. But, I am also very grateful to have had so much faith put in my abilities to embark on like a newly created role and a roadmap that I'm building and executing as I go.
Titles matter because it reflects on what they could do and influence. Abadesi's intention was to ensure this was not just simply about hiring people who had diverse backgrounds, but building a workplace of belonging for all. What can we do, though, if we are employees and aren't necessarily in these roles? Could we still make a difference in fostering a more inclusive workplace for all? Ashley says yes. There are steps you can take.
For an individual employee of an organization, I think that you So one of the things that I say from my book would be to plant seeds. You're not going to make a foundational impact, and it's okay to know that going in, that tomorrow they're not going to open up a requisition for a diversity and inclusion leader. They're not going to make you're not going to get someone. I mean, maybe you will, and that would be great, but on the average it's not going to happen immediately where you produce that kind of change. To make change as an individual person, you have to start planting seeds. And what I mean by that is build a relationship with key leaders in the organization, gain them as sponsors, gain access to people, and start planting a seed. When you plant a seed with them, and then you just every once in a while go by and keep watering it, right? I mean, obviously, like it's literally just like that. And that happens wherever you live, in whatever community. I mean, seed planting is so important in that space. I planted a seed once with a leader in the organization that I work for and that I grew my career with. And then later on, I finally got invited to have a conversation about government affairs work. And then it was another month later, I realized that we signed on to repeal discriminatory legislation that was being drafted in a community that we serve. And then I kept watering the seed. And then a month later from that, we ended up sponsoring a huge LGBTQ rights organization. And then the 3 subsequent years after that, we've renewed that sponsorship because I kept watering the seed. So one individual, while they can't necessarily make a foundational impact themselves, they could, but you have to really plant the seed.
Plant the seed. I love that suggestion. It feels more doable in a place where everyone can start. What skills really helped you to be the community leader and bridge builder you are today, Ashley?
For me, the biggest skill that probably was greatly helpful was project management. I think was a really, really helpful skill, being able to take on a project and to own something. If you want to build the right kind of sponsors, because really, honestly, that was how I got to that seat in the organization, was I had more sponsors than other people who were angling to get the same role. And if you want to get a sponsor on your side over somebody else, and we live in sometimes it's a cutthroat world out there, you need to take things off leaders' plates. So I would use strategy to take items off bosses' plates. Perfect example of that is we were actually building a playground in my community for the organization that I work for. And building one of these playgrounds is like a day-long thing, and you need lots of people to do it. Well, we didn't have a lot of employees in the market. So I orchestrated a nonprofit organization that I was involved with to fill all the other remaining 40 volunteer spots that we needed to fill. And I had them all show up in their same shirts. And at the end of the day, the regional president of the bank came up to me and said, "Ashley, who are all these people in this organization's shirts?" And I'm like, "That's my people." You said we needed people to build this playground, and I wanted to take that as an actionable item off your plate. And I said I would own it, and I delivered. So you not only have to take things off people's plate, you have to manage a project, and then you have to deliver, and then you need to track the results on said project. So I knew the number of people I got to volunteer. I knew the volunteer hours that were committed.
Who wouldn't appreciate such thoroughness and thoughtfulness? I certainly would want that every day. Ashley's answer was really insightful. Diversity experts may often say passion and empathy is the source of change. While those are important, being able to be a strategic and thorough implementer and action catalyst is also key. Who will make things come to life if you are not thinking about how communication and project flow will be executed? Because this role oversees the full D&I experience in the workplace, You have to be extra intentional about the ripple effects it will have across different channels. That's why when I asked the same question, Abadesi shared how being a great communicator is key, both verbally and in writing. Being able to share what you do and how you get the result is key to communicating the impact of the work you do in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And if you're not sure how to get better at it, find inspiration from others. Find mentors, whether it's in person or online, that you'd admire and want to learn from.
I think I am someone that definitely likes to play to my strengths. And, whether it's how can I be a better public speaker? How can I be a better writer? How can I be a better community builder? Like, how can I learn to listen better and respond to people's needs and really be useful to them and add value to their lives? And one of the things I like to do is look at the people that do this very well in the world right now. And there are certain people who I've been obsessed with since I first started reading them or listening to them or watching them, whether that's Brene Brown and the pioneering work she's done around vulnerability, whether that's Simon Sinek and the work that he's done around being driven by purpose, whether that's Kimberly Crenshaw and the work that she's done to literally invent a term to help us see the word better, Mariana Mazzucato and her work in making economics more reflective of the real realities and pressures of people's lives. And I think one of the things I love to do is just learn from them. None of these people are people I've met, but I know them very well because I read everything they've written. And I think any advice that I could share is, you don't need to be mentored by someone to be mentored by someone. Does that make sense? And I think, Arlen Hamilton is another incredible person who I just admire so much. I read her books, I listen to her podcast, I do everything. And so when you're passionate about something, and that's how you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work. When I listen to a Brene Brown and Simon Sinek talking together on my run or while I'm working out or while I'm cooking, it's a treat for me, right? It's just like putting on, I don't know, a Beyonce album. I'm actually enjoying that time.
Yes, just like how you are hanging out with us here in this podcast, Abadesi shares the powerful reminder that you could always learn if you intentionally seek it. Seek the growth you want. Get curious about the differences around you. And get hungry for the reality you want to write and build. I asked Abadesi why she is passionate about seeing this change in the workplace. She brought me back to a difficult moment she had a few years ago that led her to quit a job without plans because that was the healthier decision.
Sure. I think, I mentioned how I was working at a startup here in London. I quit Amazon to join this team, and I found myself really feeling excluded. And I made the decision to quit that job with no next move planned because I wanted to save what was left of my dignity. It really was that bad. I just felt so different to the person I was when I first joined that for me, the only way to survive was to leave. And it was really interesting, the events that sort of followed that, because there are a lot of people who felt that was quite an irresponsible decision of me, who just quits a job with no other job. There are a lot of other people that felt that I should have stayed and, done the work of teaching them and educating them. But things really came to a head when I was kind of interviewing for other roles, and no one in my last team, the team that I quit and made it very vocal why I was leaving, no one wanted to give me a reference. And in the startup world is very small. Everyone knows everybody. And it was really interesting because, again, through my economist lens, I started to think about how people's choices were impacting my material reality. Someone's decision to not acknowledge the experience that I had, the exclusion that I'd faced, someone's decision to completely dismiss that and just kind of follow the party line meant that I had job offers taken off the table. And that was wow, so how will I pay my rent? And it was really interesting because I suddenly started to realize that in their eyes, I was the villain, right? In their eyes, I was the person that came in, all of the behavior that was totally tolerable until me, the only Black person kind of enters the space and goes, well, hang on a minute. Suddenly started making them feel bad, started making them feel guilty. So in their eyes, I was the villain and I was the problem. And that was a real turning point for me because I kind of acknowledged the fact that I was an incredibly privileged person. It didn't cost a lot for me to basically dig into my savings one more time and, ask my family for, a bit of cash to like help out, ask my friends to cover the bill when we go out for dinner or go to the pub. But I was very mindful of the fact that many other people who look just like me, we mentioned at the top of the show, my mom's from the Philippines, my dad's from Nigeria. I kind of like grew up all over the world. There are a lot of people who look just like me and who work just as hard as me, who would not have those privileges. And that decision by an ex-colleague to say, no, I'm not going to give you a reference, actually could have far worse consequences for them. They might have kids that aren't going to eat that night. They might have a landlord that's not going to be so forgiving as mine and actually kick them out on the street. And I think that's when I realized, like, this is such a huge problem, right? Because the people that decided that I was the villain in that situation, their version of reality is real to them, right? With all the information they know, with everything they've seen and they've experienced, that was their interpretation of the event, right? And then on the other side of the coin, myself with my experience of it, but not only that, everything I started to learn about bias in the workplace, about why we have a lack of representation in the workplace, gave me another lens through which to analyze that situation. And I suddenly thought, if they had that lens, they probably would have reached a different conclusion and wouldn't have seen me as the villain. And, many months, years later, of course, those people kind of came around and were like, oh my gosh, super supportive of the work that I do. But thank God that I was privileged enough for that to not really happen. But another person, that could have been the end of their career.
Our inaction and carelessness could hurt others. While those watercolor jokes or homogeneous-looking marketing graphics look harmless, they have a direct impact on how we show up and engage at work. This is why the work of diversity is not just about who we hire at work, but also about how their experience is shaped in every corner. Yes, we all have unconscious bias as humans. But as both Ashley and Abadesi share, if we aren't mindful of these small steps, who is the workplace really for? They remind us that regardless of where you are, you can make the workplace more inclusive and welcoming if you start with empathy and curiosity.
One thing I would say, definitely empower someone else. Go to someone tomorrow and find out what you can do to empower them. You may not know that immediately, but it will make an impact that will build a lasting connection between you and this other person. And it will be your litmus test for how you structure your offer of empowerment. It's going to have a ripple effect, a lasting ripple effect for you and the other person. And if you get shunned, then you know that that person isn't in a space to be empowered and that you should try it with someone else, or that you need to test your delivery method of how you're going to offer. We may have referred that to offering help, but really be able to offer empowerment to someone else.
Remain culturally curious, step outside of your lived experience and absorb the lived experiences of others. And there's so many ways that you can do this. If you're really into comics, like read a comic written by someone different to you, or like you're really into, jazz, like listen to a jazz album made by an artist from like a different place to you and expand your horizon. So yeah, just remain curious of other cultures and explore that.
Start with one step at a time. Empower one colleague. Step outside your comfort zone and find ways to make your journey more tangible and enjoyable. While there's so much more to what they do, it all starts with one genuine step at a time. And by being intentional, we could create that lasting change. There is still much more work to be done, but I hope that in the future, we'll look back at how much more we have normalized creating a workplace for all. What do you think? Thanks again for joining us today. This is Monica Kang at Curious Monica. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you to our guest again for sharing your insights, empowering us to take a deeper look into the work of diversity, inclusion, and workplace belonging. Next time, we'll be visiting some friends who work in a field that feels intangible but has company-wide impact: innovation. Curious to learn more? Join us in our next episode and send us any questions you may have at info@untangle.com. We'll see you there. Have a great day.
Oh, hi, I'm Monica Escobar, the visual brand designer at InnovatorsBox, and I hope you're enjoying Curious Monica. I'm passionate about design, and I get to dive deep into my creativity while designing for InnovatorsBox. This show is brought together by our awesome team: producer Saren O, audio engineers Sam Limmer and Ravi Ladd, Kelly Gravel on marketing, website designer Akriti Pandey, and of course, this show is hosted and directed by the curious woman herself, Monica Kang, founder and CEO of InnovatorsBox. To continue the curiosity and creativity of the workplace, visit us at innovatorsbox.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share. We'd love to hear what you're curious about and what mysteries Monica can uncover in our next episodes. See you next week.